So now on BBC Two, in a change to the published programme, Sue Pennington presents a Public Eye special.
The city of Gloucester is home to the most notorious address in Britain. Today, Rosemary West was sentenced to life imprisonment for the murders of 10 young women and children, including her own daughter Heather. Fred West, her husband, accomplice and suicide, killed at least 2 more. Now the real questions start. How did the Wests get away with their series of killings? Who should have stopped them, and why did they fail? Five of the victims were found here, buried in the cellar of what had seemed to be an ordinary family home. They'd been tortured before death, sometimes for days, bound, gagged, and horribly abused.
I think if the authorities had investigated the goings-on in the West family back in 81-82, I think Heather's life would have been saved.
I find it amazing that that secret remained within that house for that length of time without somebody somewhere knowing about it. For him to keep that secret with his wife for that length of time, well, it's incredible.
I can't forgive because Rosemary knew right from wrong. I'm her brother, but I can't possibly forgive anyone for cruelty to children, let alone murders.
How could so many people disappear without question? Tonight we show how an embarrassment of bungled investigations, missed opportunities and incompetence allowed Fred and Rosemary West to get away with murder. Throughout their lives, the Wests brushed with authority, forever within its sights, almost inviting discovery. Who among these women and girls might have been saved? Frederick Walter Stephen West was to bury 2 of his victims here in the village of Remarkably, where he was raised along with 2 brothers and 3 sisters. It's an inward-looking, lonely backwater, cut off from worldly cities, imbued with rural customs. Fred West was a war baby, born the son of a poor farm labouring family in September 1941. He later claimed that at the age of 12 he'd been sexually abused by his mother. But he became an abuser himself, and by the time he was 19, a pattern was triggered that was not to be broken until he was finally arrested 34 years later. In 1960, his rape of a 15-year-old girl went unreported, but in 1961, Fred West was taken to court for a sexual offence against a 13-year-old girl. All these years on, one of the jurors, a security officer then, can still recall watching in horror as West worked tricks in the dock.
Fred West just sat in the dock, completely unperturbed. But the girl wouldn't say anything at all, not a word. And the judge then asked one of the ladies in the court, I don't know who she was, she could have been a social worker, to take the girl out and have a talk with her. Well, they was out for about possibly 20 minutes. She came back, but she still would not talk. So the judge looked down at her and said, has someone told you not to say anything? But still the girl didn't reply.
Over the years, this was to be a regular pattern. An accuser would back down at the last moment because of threats. And, just when it seemed the authorities were onto him, Fred West would give them the slip.
The reaction, I think, throughout the court was one of disbelief, despair. Couldn't believe it. The case should have gone on, we felt sure of that. Fred West had defeated the law. There's no doubt about it, that boy was guilty. Justice failed.
Fred West walked from the court a free man, free to meet and marry Rena Costello a year later and become a stepfather to her daughter Charmaine. Both would become victims. Fred West married Rosemary 23 years ago. Together they became accomplices in murder escaping detection by intimidating victims or when that failed by killing them. Rosemary West was 12 years younger than Fred. She was born Rosemary Letts, the fifth of 7 children. Although she's remembered as a bubbly, helpful child, people found her slow, and she appears to have made few friends. On the surface, the family seemed ordinary enough, but like Fred's, hers was an unhappy childhood that was often to make her withdrawn. At the family home in Bishop's Cleeve outside Cheltenham, Rosemary and her brothers and sisters suffered frequent beatings at the hands of their tyrannical father, Bill Letts, who was a diagnosed schizophrenic.
He was a madman, complete madman, when he was in these rage of temper fits, whatever.
And what did everybody else do while he was having these tempers?
Stayed out of his way, really.
Nobody was excluded from it, my mother included. And we all lived under this threat of what he would do next.
The violence of her father's outbursts was enough to drive Rosemary Letts away and to cement a relationship with Fred West.
We were all shocked and dismayed, really, because Fred was quite a bit older than Rosemary. Quite scruffy looking. And his first impressions, when you tried to make a conversation with him, was he was an out-and-out liar.
She was besotted with him.
Yes, I think after maybe 6 months of going with him, I think that she was. I think she'd actually fallen head over heels for him.
Did your parents or any of you realise that Fred West was married when he was calling?
Most certainly not, no. No, we only found that out some months later, when there were various other things that kept cropping up that we were finding out about. The one was his marriage. There was another one about he had been in prison.
They went to social services and actually got Rosemary put into care. Now, at the time, she was 15 and a half, so the very worst that could happen was that she would stay in care until she was 16, which was what happened eventually. But it didn't deter her one little bit. In fact, if anything, I think it made her more determined to stay with Fred.
Rosemary Letts went from care to live with Fred in a temporary home near Cheltenham and to look after his children. Her relationship with Fred West is noted in Children's Department files from the time, and we've established there was some concern, but nothing came of it. We now know that all was far from well. Did everything go smoothly when Fred and Rosemary went off to live together at the beginning?
Oh no, there was one occasion that comes to light. When Rosemary did leave Fred, I think it was a couple of years after they got together. And she came back home. I'm not sure if it was just I think it was just for the night. And anyway, Fred came round to fetch her and said, "Come on, Rosemary, you know what we got between us. Come on back home." And Rosemary, as she was leaving the house, said, "Mum, Dad, you don't know what he's really like. He's even capable of murder."
The couple's first address in Gloucester was a flat in Midland Road. Here, no one was to check on the whereabouts of Fred's first wife, Rena, whose remains were found at Remarkably, nor on whether the West's marriage in 1972 was bigamous. No one checked Rosemary's claims when Fred's 8-year-old stepdaughter Charmaine disappeared, that she'd gone back to her mother Rena and was living in Scotland.
Charmaine, we was told, preferred to be with her mother, and that was the reason why she disappeared. And Scotland was a very long way away at the time, although we loved Charmaine, all of us, dearly, but it was maybe a little bit strange that she suddenly wanted to go back, and not to say cheerio.
Charmaine's body was eventually found here, at 25 Midland Road, buried beneath the kitchen floor. Rosemary West had killed her in 1971 while Fred was in prison. Now their webs were joined in murder. Rosemary would come to dominate the partnership, but already they shared the same abnormal appetite for sex.
As times got by, as I got to know Rosemary and Fred West, Rose started telling me about her personal life. How did I feel about it? She was a prostitute. I just told her it was her business, it was nothing to do with me. She did go into details that she had like microphones or something in the bedroom, because if she ever had clients there, Fred was always on the opposite side into the next room, and he likes to listen to things like that.
What did you think about that?
Weird, absolutely weird, but their life, it was up to them to whatever I thought turned them on, and I never took no notice really. I liked her for what she was, and as a friend, what she did in her own business, or in her own life, it was her own business, not mine.
What about Fred? What sort of conversations did you have with him?
Well, he started off a casual conversation like, how are you, where have you been? And then as time went by, it got to sex. He always talked about sex. He used to say to me, what I could do with you in bed, would I like to try it with him? If I like, I can have 3 in the bed, him, Rose and myself. How would I feel like if I went on the game? It was just sex mad.
But there were more sinister conversations yet. Fred and Rosemary West actually told Liz Agius back in 1971 about their activities at night. They took the trouble to spell out in great detail what we now know to have been the prelude to murder. They were even alarmingly frank about their tactics.
He said to me that he likes to go around finding young girls so that because they've run away, they've got no home, he will support them by giving them a roof over their heads, and if they want to go on the game, work for him. Then one day, Rose knocked on the door. She said she was going out with Fred. And I said, well, why are you going with him, And she turned around and said to me, so long as there's a woman in the car with a male, there's always an easy chance for another girl who they're going to pick up will get inside the car, because she will be there with him.
By 1972, 3 lives had been taken. But the real frenzy of sexual attacks and killings was to begin when they moved a few hundred yards away to Cromwell Street. To know the bedsit world the Wests had chosen for themselves is to understand in part how they got away with it. Cromwell Street was the sort of place that attracted people who'd not be missed. As events would show, few questions were asked in these streets. It was just the sort of place where Fred and Rosemary West could hide when they set themselves up here as landlords.
You never know who owned the property. I came to Gloucester in 1961, and Cromwell Street was an area which I would describe as bedsits, with people who did not stay very long in one particular place, would move on from A to B at very short notice. There was a lot of older generation people there, but a lot of youngsters as well, 17, 25 years of age. I've put their age group, more or less unemployed.
The Wests first rented number 25 as their family home and took in lodgers. The weekly rent in the 70s was £5. Tenants came and went, unaware that Fred and Rosemary West were turning the property into a charnel house. In the cellar of Cromwell Street, victims were subjected to the most degrading sexual assaults. After binding them and taping their heads, the Wests carried out acts of sexual perversion. Some of the victims died in the process. Others could not be allowed to live. Fred West actually boasted about his intentions.
We went down there, and Fred said he wasn't sure what to make of this yet. He said, I don't know whether to make it a playing area for the children. Or he nudged me and he used to say, or else I could make this into my torture room and things like that. He said, just think, he said, what I could do to you down here if he said, nobody will hear me. He said, because I'd make it soundproof. And I used to say, keep wishing.
Did Fred ever threaten you or attack you?
Once me and Rose I was in what they call the sitting room, but there was beds as well inside there, in this room. I was sitting on the settee, Rose was making a cup of tea. And the next thing, Fred came behind from the door, put these handcuffs on me, and I was quite nervous on it, and then Rose turned around and said, "Get them friggin' off her," just like that. And without any hesitation, he took them off. He said, "I was only joking." No, first of all, sorry, when he put the handcuffs on me, he said, "Now I've got you, this is what I could do with you," he said, "and you couldn't do anything about it,
Did you ever consider going to the police?
No. They weren't on my mind what they did. All I was worried about is myself and my children, my husband. What they did was their business. I accept them as they are, so long as I wasn't involved in anything. All I knew is that Rose was a prostitute, and they both had other women as prostitutes, but I didn't see any. It was only what they told me.
And yet you've told me that there were things about them that made you wary.
Well, yeah, but that was for myself. I didn't know they was going to kill anybody or torture anybody. You wouldn't have thought that they were the type of couple to have done that.
In 1972, the Wests committed a serious sexual assault that nearly gave them away. They abducted and violently abused a 17-year-old girl. Here, undisguised for the authorities to pick up on, was the blueprint for the murders to follow. But the case was bungled. The police wouldn't comment to this programme. However, it was their decision to prosecute in a magistrate's court.
Can I say I've been practising in the magistrate's court for probably 30 years or so. And this was perhaps the most astonishing decision on the part of the prosecution that I've known during that time. It seemed to me to be a very serious case, which I would not normally expect to be dealt with by lay magistrates.
What would you have expected to happen in this case?
I would have expected the case to have been dealt with by a judge. And of course the judge has more experience in sentencing in serious cases, and of course has greater powers.
Even though the case was tried in a magistrate's court, there was still one failsafe that could yet have caught out the Wests. The magistrates could have ordered further investigations, but they didn't do that, and the Wests got off with paltry fines.
The sentence which was imposed was one of the most extraordinary sentences that I can remember, even to the extent that I remember, after all these years, walking back to my office after the case and walking into one of my partner's rooms, a solicitor called Alan Johnson, who's an old friend who we tend to chat about our cases, and walking into his room and saying, really, I couldn't believe the outcome of this particular case.
Bill Messer is another person who can't believe what happened. He was a social worker and social work trainer in Gloucester in the late 70s and 80s. In his opinion, the next big mistake in dealing with the Wests was that the court did not involve social or probation services.
The fact that the magistrate didn't ask for a social inquiry report almost beggars belief. I think if that case had been properly investigated and properly handled by the courts, perhaps the Wests might have been stopped in their tracks at that point.
Today, Gloucester's police headquarters and Gloucestershire Social Services are situated only yards apart. But in the 70s and 80s, communication was poor and cooperation between agencies was thin on the ground. Had it been otherwise, might they together have succeeded where the courts failed?
We have a couple who are accused here of fairly serious sexual offences. Now, if the police discovered that there were young children in that family and that this couple had actually sexually abused a young person, and she was technically a young person, a lot of alarm bells should have been ringing, and they should have been getting in touch with perhaps several agencies. They should have been getting in touch, certainly, with social services.
Can you tell me what the relationship was between the police and social services in your time as a policeman in the 70s?
Poor, in a word, poor. I don't think many police officers have a great deal of time for social services. The dissemination of information between the two groups was negligible. From a basic working policeman's point of view, I'd find that somebody arrested would be taken before court, social workers would interfere with excuses for his behaviour, and the man would be leaving court without, in my view, I suppose, adequate punishments, rap on the wrist.
This lack of communication between agencies goes a long way towards explaining how the goings-on in the West household went unchallenged for so long. Parts of the jigsaw surrounding 25 Cromwell Street were already there, waiting to be pieced together. The Wests had told someone they were touring the countryside looking for girls. Both were openly obsessed with sex, and now they'd been found out in a serious sexual assault. By the end of 1973, just 11 months after they'd been fined a total of £50 each, at least 6 women were dead. But not once did the shadow of suspicion fall on Fred or Rosemary West. What's more, although the police may not have admitted it at the time, they were linking 3 of the 6 murders. Carol Ann Cooper disappeared while in care in Worcester. Lucy Partington had disappeared from a lonely bus stop. A 7th suspected victim, Mary Bastholm, went missing in 1968.
During the 1970s, were Gloucestershire police looking for a killer?
Yes, after the disappearance of Mary Bastholm, although her body was never found, that was treated as a full-scale murder inquiry. And when Lucy Partington went missing, there was an immediate link with Mary Bastholm. The girl from Worcester, exactly the same. There was an immediate link with both Partington and with Bastholm. And so in police circles and local gossip between police officers, strongly believed that one person was responsible for all of those killings, and the presumption is that person would be local. Serial killer, well, that wasn't a word bandied about in the 70s, but yes, you could call it that. That it was quite firmly believed that one person was responsible and that he could well have been a local person. But who that person was, well, we didn't know it was Fred West, that's for sure.
Fred West had a police record, dating back as far as the early 60s. It's one of the tragic ironies of this case that Fred West was well known to the police. His criminal career ranged from littering and not paying his TV licence fee to motoring offences and theft. He'd even spent time in jail in 1971. Over the years, he almost courted police interest with activities that had detectives calling on him on a regular basis.
Did you know Fred West?
Yes, I knew Fred. Met Fred many times in the Poppin Cafe, which is a little cafe in Southcote Street, where the youngsters used to congregate. Fred being a little bit older than them, where I used to pick up little snips of information, listen, find out what was going on. And I also met Fred when he had been brought into custody for petty things, where he was fingerprinted and photographed.
He was quite well known?
Yes, Fred was well known to the police as a petty criminal.
So were some of Fred and Rosemary West's lodgers. 25 Cromwell Street was a haven for small-time drug dealers. It was almost as though, at the height of the killings, the Wests were inviting discovery, mocking the police by playing their murderous games right under their very noses.
What's your experience of the police visiting 25 Cromwell Street?
Well, they used to come there because there was 2 students there called Ben and Dapper. They lived upstairs and they were doing dealings with drugs. And used to be about 2 or 3 policemen in the car. And sometimes the paddy wagon used to come. Used to be about twice a month they used to call there.
Did you ever pick anybody up there?
Oh yes, I have arrested a man from there, yes, who was on the first floor looking out the window one evening. He was arrested for burglary. He was staying in Fred's property. He was arrested and taken into custody and subsequently charged with 6 or 7 offences of burglary.
The Wests even had what they thought was a police informer lodging at 25 Cromwell Street. It was police officer Ricky Colclough's mother. Perhaps sensing that her presence in the house was too risky, the Wests tried, as the local paper reported, to get rid of her. Fred West told a rent tribunal that it was because of his tenant the house was raided every time he turned his back. He had a lot to hide.
How did Fred West tend to view the police?
Extremely violently, with a hatred that seemed to be beyond the normal average criminal's hatred. Most of that I learned from my mother, with the fact that he would be always talking about the police, and he would have, I suppose, a persecution complex, justified or otherwise, but he hated the police with a vehemence which is unusual.
Despite all their attention to the Wests, Gloucestershire police weren't even getting close. 25 Cromwell Street was the last known address of one of the Wests' murder victims, Linda Gough. She went missing in 1973, but the police were simply told she'd moved. Another lodger, Juanita Mott, shared her fate in 1978. Yet another, Shirley Robinson, pregnant with Fred West's child, also disappeared in the same year. The sort of people staying at Cromwell Street were the perfect victims. Youngsters enjoying first freedoms, many of them having recently left home or care. Council records show the Wests bought the house in 1973 for £6,000. Standards weren't up to much. The council took the couple to court in 1975 for breaching safety regulations. But lodgers have since told us people just accepted conditions. After all, this was bedsit land.
They were like me, you know, they most probably didn't have a lot of money and they were probably enjoying life to the full. Maybe they didn't have their relatives close by. Or maybe they'd fallen out with their family for some particular reason. Very much the same as myself.
Surrounded by people, the Wests tortured, murdered and buried 9 young women at 25 Cromwell Street. It seems astonishing now that they managed to do it without any of the occupants noticing. But there were visible abuses back in the 70s that should have prompted investigation. One of their children, Anna Marie, was having underage sex with their open encouragement.
When did she tell you her first sexual experiences had been?
Well, 8. We were lying in bed the one time and the conversation come up. And she asked me and I said I think I was 15, I think I was.
When you lost your virginity?
Yeah. And she said 8. Which I tried to press and find out more about it. She did say something about her mother, but then she just clammed up, got dressed and went home, and I didn't see her for a couple of days afterwards.
But she seemed to be suggesting that she'd lost her virginity to her mother.
Yeah.
If strangers couldn't be relied on to inform on the Wests, there was always the family. Rosemary's father saw what was happening, but even he turned a blind eye to it.
He did spend one night at the house at 25 Cromwell Street. And he actually caught a man leaving one of the girls' bedrooms. And he told Fred about it. And Fred said, "Look, Bill," he said, "what goes on in this house is my business, not yours." And Dad turned around and said, "Well, if that's the case, I'm off," and went.
Over many years, no one reported the sexual and physical abuse taking place in the house. The children made 31 hospital visits over a 20-year period. We know of one case of sexual disease, also of lacerations to breasts, legs and hands. The Rosemary Letts of old, who'd always deferred to her husband, was now a violent woman.
Well, she treated her oldest one like a slave. One day I heard Rosemary asking Anna to do something, but I'm not sure quite what it was. And Anna happened to answer her back. And Rosemary gave her a beating. and it lasted for about 5 minutes.
Pretty violent beating?
Yeah. Well, I thought it was anyway. But I didn't say anything, because it's none of my business.
How did Rosemary behave with the children?
When Fred was there, she was all right. But when he wasn't there, she seemed to pick on Anna a lot. This one day, for no particular reason, she got hold of Anna's hair and she dragged her from one side of the room to the other and screamed, shout, punched her. I just couldn't believe it. And I said to Rose West once when I caught her hitting her, and I said, if ever I see you, Mark, then I would report you. She said, no, Liz, I won't do that. And I said, you won't do that? And I said, look how you treat them. I said, you pull her bloody hair? And she said, but she makes me mad. She said, don't your kids make you mad? I said, well, yeah, but not like you.
Other older children in the family were also being regularly abused. Stephen West suffered beatings and sometimes worse.
I think it was round about that age, 7 or 8, that he had this accident with his finger that was supposed to have been cut off with a razor blade, but didn't seem to add up somehow.
In what way?
Well, I was told that he caught a razor blade, which I would have thought you'd have got out of the way of, not tried to catch, even as a child, that you wouldn't not try to catch a razor blade.
What do you believe had happened in reality, or what did Steve tell you had happened?
I think it later came to light that Rose liked to, if their fingers went up on the worktop, she'd get out the way with a knife.
Inside the house, Rosemary West was continuing to ply her trade as a prostitute, advertising for clients in contact magazines. She used porn with men and women, often accompanied by violence. We've discovered the police were aware in the 70s that the West's sex life might have a criminal dimension. They even knew then that the West's 13-year-old daughter, Anna Marie, was involved, but they chose to do very little about it.
2 police officers come to my house. My father kicked him out, and all they did was drive me around the corner and chat to me. All they wanted to know is if Fred had any magazines and cine movies, etc., general porn stuff in the house. I just said, well, no, I haven't seen anything like that. And then he says, right, it's left to the chief constable or the top dog to see whether I get charged or not.
So they knew about your having sex with a child, basically?
Basically, yes, yeah.
The police thought a caution sufficient. However, Gloucestershire's welfare agencies took an interest. Something alerted them, but like the police, they appear to have missed vital clues. Fred and Rosemary West were able to fob off officials when they called at number 25 to see the children, including Stephen.
He was made to stand outside whilst they did a head count, and they seemed to think that there was one more, but they were told there wasn't, and that he was made to stand outside in the snow because he had received a beating, and they weren't allowed to see him.
Had a beating and presumably therefore had marks?
Yeah, I think so. He was made to stand outside because there was telltale signs.
Officials from the main welfare agency, Social Services, weren't alerted to abuse against the West children. Worse still, the problem became fatally linked with the difficulties Social Services were having with children they themselves were caring for. Fred West targeted Jordensbrook, one of the County Council's homes for young girls. 2 of the victims lived here. Absconding was rife and the girls were vulnerable. But because this was not secure accommodation, it was something the authorities came to accept.
How seriously did the police take these disappearances?
From Jordensbrook? Not a great deal. They were happening so often, daily. The children would go out, sometimes in groups of 2, 3, 4, 6, 10 overnight missing from Jordensbrook. The majority would stay local in the Gloucester area.
Alison Chambers was 17 and in care when she became the West's penultimate victim in 1979. Another Jordensbrook girl was raped but escaped. It's sobering to note that in all 5 women murdered by Fred and Rosemary West had been in care, lonely, loveless girls. What's particularly disturbing about their deaths is the frightening calculation with which the Wests deliberately sought them out, knowing they might not be missed, and that the authorities would do little about it.
There's not a great dissimilarity between a missing dog and a missing person. It's impossible with the number of missing people to actively investigate every one. 99.9% of missing people turn up within the next couple of days. The inquiries would be extended to near families, friends. Where might they have gone to? They would have been checked. You would look at that. But if the person's non-vulnerable, an adult, and it would appear that it's quite likely they went off of their own accord to go somewhere else, well, the immediate suspicion isn't that somebody has killed them.
What's striking about this case, though, is that there was more evidence than mere suspicion to work on. There were times when the authorities were actually told that something was wrong. In 1982, a woman who wants to remain anonymous told the police about a disturbing conversation she'd had with Fred West about her family's video store.
He started asking questions about the video shop and who owned it, and did they do blue movies down there? And I said they had the electric blue ones, and he said no, the real thing, that he could get hold of them, and that he actually made them in his house. And he said he'd done some involving his daughters. They were sex videos and lesbian romps and different things like that. And then he got into a conversation, had I heard of snuff movies? And I explained they had one down the shop actually called Snuff. He said no, he could get hold of the real thing, the actual real snuff movies, where they actually done it. And I couldn't understand that a man could talk to somebody about things like that. It was just sickening. So when I got home, we talked it over, and I phoned the police the next morning and explained that I'd had the conversation I had with Fred West, and I gave him the name and the address, and he said it would be investigated.
Heather, the West's second oldest daughter, was yet to become the last known victim in 1987. The police had here within their grasp the real secret of Cromwell Street, and it seems they let it go. They weren't the only ones. Direct reports of abuse inside number 25 were made to welfare agencies. We know a report was made anonymously to social services in 1988 by one of Rosemary West's clients. Another was made to Stephen West School in 1989.
What sort of injuries did you start to notice on Steve's body?
Well, he wouldn't let you touch his head much. He had a lot of lumps and bumps on his head, and his knees were a weak point. He said like they'd automatically hit at his knees to stop him running out the front door, because at one time I know that he was beaten, and he did more or less jump the gates and escape. So then from that point on, his knees were a target to stop him running.
The school had failed to report an incident in 1987, but now they involved the NSPCC. Neither they, social services, nor Gloucestershire Police felt able to speak to this programme about their involvement with the Wests. However, we do know case conferences were convened at the school for Stephen West. Once again, though, Fred West got to his accuser.
He just hung his head, he wouldn't say a word. They'd ask him about his legs, and he'd say yeah, well, a lot of kids get beat. You know, it's nothing unusual. He wouldn't elaborate on anything at all. And then one day, we went to about 3 or 4 meetings together. Then one day, it blew up in my face, and he told me to butt out, and I said, fair enough, you carry on with it yourself.
Why was Steve so reluctant to talk, do you think?
I think because he knew what the sort of repercussions would be at home. I think the social worker that we were talking to went to the house, and I think his dad shut the door in his face and told him to butt out, mind their own business, and it got worse. I think Steve got into quite a bit of trouble because of that, and I didn't want to take it any further because I knew that it was going to get worse for Stephen, so I just butted out at that point.
I don't know whether the child was put on the at-risk register, for instance. I imagine that he was. If he was not even put on the at-risk register, I would say that we have a clear indication of incompetence, professional incompetence. and a standard of service falling far below what its users have a right to expect.
Stephen West was not put on the at-risk register. The NSPCC decided instead this was simply a family in need of counselling. It was another 4 years before an investigation began that forced the secrets from within the house. Fred and Rosemary West were charged in 1992 with child sex abuse. The usual tactic was brought into play.
One of the children actually told me that they were threatened. While Fred was in custody, he actually managed to get a letter to them saying that their lives were in danger if they carried on. They were just too scared. This is what they told me later, which horrifies me, to be quite honest.
The case at Gloucester Crown Court collapsed because of the threats, but it sparked an investigation into Heather's disappearance. It was this that finally brought the real horror home. Detective Constable Hazel Savage, seen here shortly after Fred West was eventually arrested, is acknowledged to be the person who instigated the digging in Cromwell Street in search of Heather. But we've discovered she'd been suspicious of the Wests as far back as the 70s, much to Fred West's annoyance.
He thought she was a hardened woman and make other unnecessary comments about her, much the same as he did to other women, really. And he talked about it quite a lot, actually. I got the feeling that she'd probably been investigating him, and that's why he talked about her. And of course then there was Rose returning from nights out and complaining that the being police had been following her around and accusing her of prostitution.
The real crimes went undetected, but when finally the digging started in Cromwell Street, the woman who'd rung the police 12 years before decided to ring again.
I rang the number and explained what had happened all those years ago in 81, 82, of my conversation with Fred. They said they would get somebody to ring me back. 3 days later, somebody still hadn't rang me back. So I then phoned again and explained that nobody had got in touch with me. And I think that what had gone on, the conversation with me and Fred, should be investigated. They went and got PC Savage, the detective. She came on the phone and asked me to explain the conversation. I explained the conversation Fred said to me, and also about the snuff movies, and she went quiet.
The Wests had spent their years killing and talking to people about it, never afraid of authority, parading within its sights. Why were they never found out? It's an indictment of us all that we ask too few questions and speak up even less. But broken lines of communication and professional failure played their part too.
I think they let the family down badly. I think they could have done something sooner. They seemed to let it drop far too easily when I reported it to the school. And they just didn't seem to be that bothered, even though there was obvious, even to outsiders, that something odd was going on.
It does look to me as though more might have been done to pick up the fact that things were not right with this family. And if there were warnings, even anonymous warnings, I think they should have been picked up.
Who knew what and when, and whether they did the right thing is now under scrutiny. Today, police asked for information about another 9 women known to have visited Cromwell Street who are missing. But those who fell beneath the West's malevolent gaze and survived can only speculate on what might have been their fate.
What are your thoughts as you look back on your time when you knew the Wests?
Well, I look at it that I'm one of the lucky people to be alive today, because when I think about it, I think, were they trying to find out if I was going to be one of the people that if they picked on me, would I be missed? Because Fred used to come out with, where do you go every day? If you didn't go to your mum's and things like that, where would I go? And I used to say to him, if I didn't go to our mum's every day, she'd be on my doorstep.
Often in relationships there's a power balance, isn't there? One person is the dominant person and the other one follows the other's lead. How was it within this relationship?
I would have said Rose was the more dominant. It seemed to be that if Rose said jump, Fred would. And it was obvious that he was very, very much in love with her. He loved her. The way things were, he would have done everything and anything for her.
I punish myself every day for it, for not asking enough questions, for just not finding out more and maybe stopping it before it happened. And you can't put that into words.
It's hard to put into words our sense of collective guilt over the Cromwell Street murders. About 2,000 people in Britain are missing, long-term, without trace. It's their right to disappear, if they so choose. But how many have chosen, and what have we cared?